Welcome to Exposing Deathcare, a podcast created to shine a light on the hidden, often dark realities within the funeral industry. I'm your host, Em, and each episode we bring you real stories from those who have experienced the best and worst of this hidden world. This podcast is a platform to expose unethical practices, harmful experiences, and shady dealings that have plagued grieving families, funeral staff, and the industry as a whole. By bringing these stories to light, Exposing Deathcare aims to push for transparency, support those affected by trauma, and encourage necessary reforms in the way deathcare operates. By bringing these stories to light, Exposing Deathcare aims to push for transparency, support those affected by trauma, and encourage necessary reforms in the way deathcare operates. From documentaries to dramatizations, what's fact, what's fiction, and what are they still not telling you? Listener discretion is advised. The stories shared in this podcast at times may be anonymous to protect the individuals involved. Thank you for listening, and we hope that by sharing these stories, we can work together to improve the deathcare industry for everyone involved. And welcome back to Exposing Deathcare, the podcast. Today, my guest is guest Kay. Kay, do you want your first name said in this episode, or you just want to go by Kay?
Kelly's fine.
Hello, Kelly.
Yeah. Hello, Melissa. It's so lovely to meet you here.
Thank you so much. Give me a little bit about your background. Well, you gave me a little bit of background. Give everybody else a little bit of background on your experience in end of life.
Sure. Thank you. I have, I think, probably a somewhat unique background in the sense that I've been on both sides, both the dying and the death. I have a experience in nursing. I began in hospice care some 30 years ago, and I did also work in the funeral industry for a number of years. So together, that's given me a pretty good overview of what families go through at end of life. I have a degree in nursing and a master in health sciences, and 10 years ago or so, I founded Community Deathcare Ottawa because part of why I had been working for funeral homes was with a desire to make change in the way we approach death. And what I realized after a few years was that it's pretty hard to make those changes from within. And so doing something that was more community-based, advocating for family-led care, and really just having conversations like this one to let people know that there are other possibilities.
Yes, very much so. I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit of what's going on in Canada. I will openly admit, I have had a lot of people on my Facebook that want more information about Canada, and I feel so ignorant about it because, number one, the American school system failed me, and number two, it looks so giant and daunting up there. It looks ginormous on the map. I'm just like,
Right.
Is everything really, really spread out, or are we getting a crappy version of the map?
Well, you know what? Both things are true. Most of the population is along the Canada-US border. And so we do have cities that are, have pretty high density, like Toronto or Vancouver. But if you're looking at Canada as a landmass, there are certainly places where you could go miles and miles and not encounter another human. So it
Wild.
really depends on, where we're talking about.
Gotcha. All right. What came to mind when I did this call for stories for the podcast?
Well, I'll start by saying I know we've all heard the heartbreaking and horrific tales, and unfortunately, these things continue to happen. I had a really great experience, and so what ran through my mind when I saw your call out was that, let's also keep in mind the funeral professionals that really do have a desire to serve and are providing beautiful, compassionate care. I think sometimes the problem is the system itself and not the individual practitioners. But I definitely had an experience that I appreciated. I saw some things that, there are changes that are happening in the industry that I'm concerned about. I think there's a race towards the bottom, to kind of be the like everything is an Amazon version of how little can we pay employees, how much can we squeeze out of them. More and more women are moving into the industry, which I think is a wonderful change. I celebrate that. I think that will really change our manner of approach. But there are practical considerations around. I'm saying this a little bit from my nursing background. People end up with bad backs, and they blow at their knees, and from years of moving patients. And we're going to start seeing the same thing, I think, with the funeral industry. That let's imagine we have two recent grads from the funeral director school, and you've got two 20-something women who are maybe 200 pounds added up together, and they get sent out to pick up a body, and the decedent is close to 300 pounds. And so those are things that families maybe don't think about, that I'm imagining, that there are practical demands, physical demands, and in this sort of move towards how can we just pay people as little as possible and overwork them. We're going to end up with less than great service, and we're going to end up with people that cannot stay in the profession over a lifetime. We're
We
going to end up
already
with
have that. That's
Yeah.
happening in America already.
Okay.
So if you guys are just behind us on that, burnout, people coming into the industry with the greatest heart, and then having the experiences that we've talked about before, and just like not having the energy in them to try to make a change like you and I are doing from the inside, where it's just easier to step back and wash their hands of it. So,
Right.
yeah. So tell me more.
Well, I'm not sure how we make change. That this is a question that I reflect on frequently. People don't want to deal with death. We're very death avoidant, and so oftentimes people are not encountering the fact that there is a problem, there is a challenge, until they're in the moment of need, the moment of crisis. And so part of what I wonder about is, how do we galvanize people so that they will start trying to ask for what it is that they need and want before they're in that moment of emergency. And so, I think a bad death in some ways is like a bad birth, that we don't get a chance to do it again. And so it becomes a story that lingers in a family. I think we've probably encountered women who had a bad delivery, and that just becomes a story you hear over and over again, that it's really hard to metabolize and integrate that as your experience. And similarly, when we go through a bad death, and whether that is, on when we're talking about the actual dying and perhaps what's happened in that space, or when we're talking about a funeral home that maybe wasn't focused on the family's needs, that we're maybe making some choices that were more about expediency, or how do we make the most money, or even just a service that isn't really reflective of the person who's died. All of those things become a story that the family has to carry, and it's very difficult to, I think, then have a good relationship with grief and the fact that we've lost our person. Like, we sort of end up stuck in that moment, wishing that it had been otherwise, and unable to go back and change the past. And so this too is a reason why I'm so appreciative of the work that you're doing, and podcasts like this, because it really matters. And we don't, I think, have an embodied, felt sense of how much it matters until we've been through the experience.
Absolutely.
I was part of a presentation last week, various people who were, talking about death-related topics. And one of the presenters was a documentarian who had been in Ukraine early on in the war and spent a couple of years is working on a film project. And one of the things that he mentioned was that he and a local that he'd become friends with went to a cemetery. And this man happens to have family history in the region. And there was it wasn't quite clear if it was like a mausoleum or a memorial, but something that his family had some kind of relationship with. And the thing that he shared was that the Russians had deliberately targeted that structure and destroyed it. And I felt like it was this really great example of an understanding that how we tend and honor our dead really has a tremendous psychological impact. And so here you have some, like a country that is trying to be strategic in their warmongering and recognizing that destroying a memorial or a mausoleum is devastating for a local population. And I think in our death avoidant culture here in North America, we might think, well, what does it matter? I mean, those people died decades ago. But the reality is we are deeply affected by our experience with death, and it's an ongoing impact that it has on us. So, for those people that sort of shrug and, the old saying that, like, oh, I'll just be, just throw me over the back fence, or, I'll just be worm food. It's so much more complicated. Like, this really affects our sense of self and wellness, who we are as a people, and is really deserving of our attention and consideration.
What's accessible out where you reside, Kelly?
In terms of death care?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'm in Ontario, and it is pretty wide open. And I'll quickly mention that I'm where I live. I'm just across the river from Quebec, and that is a different province that, relative to any other province or any U.S. state, is very restrictive. So I'm going to say broadly that Canada is quite flexible and amenable to family-led care, with the exception of Quebec.
Oh, wow.
So
okay.
Here in Ontario, we're governed by the funeral and cemetery services are governed by the Bereavement Authority of Ontario. So they're a regulatory body, a consumer protection agency. And so that's who makes sure that everybody's doing what they're supposed to do. And thanks to advocacy work by Community Deathcare, their guide a few years ago, they began publishing their guide about that outlines who's allowed to do what. So what can a cemetery do? What can a funeral home do? What can a transfer service do? They started including what can the family do in the guide. And the thing that's so amazing to see, you can look at this checklist and see that virtually everything on that list the family can do without the involvement of a funeral home, a funeral director, any professional services.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we cannot, bury grandma in the backyard. We can't build our own, funeral pyre. Those things we do still have to, seek out professional services. But caring for the body, transporting the body, filling out paperwork, really almost anything we can do ourselves for our beloved dead. Now, we can't charge money for that. We can't offer those as services to others. So that's always a thing that, especially with so many people being interested in death doulas, being a death doula, I like to remind folks that this is what we're allowed to do for our family. It doesn't mean that we can, put out a shingle and do it as a, sort of a side gig.
Mm-hmm.
But we have always cared for our dead. This is a human practice that, since time immemorial, we have engaged in. And in this regard, I would say it's a birthright. And it has been so long for many of us in North America since we have engaged in that practice. We don't remember we don't have a living memory of the benefit of how it helps us tend to our grief, how this can be the last loving gesture towards our person. And although it is so difficult in the moment, it's so challenging, it really does help us begin to come to terms with the fact that our person has died, and allows us to start integrating this new reality that doesn't include their physical presence.
Very good.
What I'm hoping to see as we move forward is the funeral industry start to recognize that, we have the internet. People
Hmm.
know what's what. Um, Folks know that they have more options than, I think many in the industry have let on. The days of telling people that you have to embalm, or that you can't touch your person, or what, all of these I'll say stories that we sort of know that a lot of this was really in service to the industry and not to the families, and that it was never really true. Um, and I do encounter funeral professionals that are beginning to include the family in a meaningful way. And I personally am not, um, I am perhaps in opposition to people that still want to take advantage of grieving families, but I'm not in an adversarial role with the funeral profession itself. And I know
Hmm.
some really wonderful people. But having said that, what I'm hoping is that it's a very traditional industry, so it resists change.
Oh, yeah.
And what might happen is, the recognition that the the consumer expectation has changed, and we need to change along with it.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
yeah, so I mean, there's a local funeral home here that, 10 years there was, I think, a huge amount of resistance to natural burial and to shrouding, and I would say that persists. But this one particular funeral home, the manager is kind of looking at what's happening in the public domain, and just recognizes that if people want shrouding, we can shroud. This is what we used to do. This, in fact, is a very traditional practice. If people want natural burial, it's what we used to do. And so that that idea that, like, we could be working together, always with always in mind the family that's grieving, and how can we best attend to what they're going through, and support them.
That's really
Um,
encouraging to see online as well, the funeral professionals that are starting to have an online presence in education and things like that.
mhm.
I feel like I was a rogue soldier back when I started doing the social media in 2015 and telling people what was going on behind the scenes. So I've been around and watching this trend evolve over time, and it kind of cracks me up now that some of the people that used to pick on me now have their own social media presence and are doing far more than I ever did behind the scenes.
Mm,
So
mhm.
I'm thankful for that. But with the growth of social media and the internet, as you mentioned previously, what I'm noticing now is I have a really good eye on the trends, and not just the trends, but marketing in general and death care, and a little bit of behind the scenes. What I'm
Mhm.
seeing now is greenwashing,
Oh,
where
yes.
companies are proclaiming how wonderful their process is and their options, and in reality they're misleading, or they're not disclosing completely and transparently what's going on behind the scenes. So what are your thoughts on any of that? What have you seen? What do you think about the greenwashing?
That is certainly happening, and it is disheartening. But we live in late stage capitalism, so you know, I recognize we're going to encounter that, and I am happy to push back against it. Um, as I say, I'm gonna come back to that question, but again, I have known and worked alongside really amazing directors, and we still hear of less than admirable behavior. And I had a friend who's had a family member died 3 years ago, so somewhat recently,
Mm-hmm.
and was convinced to buy a $10,000 casket for direct cremation.
Mm.
And so it is disheartening to think that some people will do or say whatever to make a sale. And greenwashing, I think, is part of that. And again, I'll invoke mercy on all parties, because we are all part of this system that really just wants to suck the life out of us all, and to resist it can be really challenging. The greenwashing is absolutely a problem. I know 2 years ago I gave a talk on natural burial, and I called all the local cemeteries and was really surprised by how many of them were offering green burial.
Mm-hmm.
And I regret the fact that I then shared this information with the public, because then when I actually went back and went to these places, it was not green burial. It was,
I'm very glad you
sometimes,
shared that.
yeah, sometimes it's like the ugliest industrial corner
Mm-hmm.
at a cemetery that they're like, we can't sell plots here, but if we call it natural burial, now we've got a marketing angle.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it is simply that a place isn't insisting on embalming, or that they maybe have a restriction on the kinds of plants that can be included. So it is sometimes pretty thin what a business is using as, this is what we are describing as green burial. And it's where I think the Green Burial Council can be helpful in terms of, here's
I
what
don't
we
know.
mean. Hmm? Are
And
they?
I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure.
I am a fan of the Green Burial Council. Let's put that
Hmm.
out there. I present for them. I volunteer for them and do all these things.
Hmm.
One thing, I don't know how Canada's organization of it does it, if there's one for them. But what I see in America is that anybody can take their course and be certified. They do not have, it may be ability to have boots on the ground people that are going out to these locations to verify what is actually going on in these cemeteries.
Mm.
Um, I'm getting all because
Hmm.
there was a situation in Vermont where a place was advertising that they were doing green burials and they were pre-selling plots. And then people were dying and they were like, "Oh, we're not ready yet. Put your loved one in refrigeration for 2 months while we figure it out." And it's like,
Mm.
and then you'll have, the most traditional old school cemetery, and that, like you said, will be like, "Well, we can't do anything with this section. Let's charge more because we're not going to mow or put pesticides back there, and we'll call that green burial."
Hmm.
I was actually really surprised. I visited a couple of cemeteries recently in California on my excursion down the Pacific Northwest, and there were two very established cemeteries that did have a green section, but theirs seemed very intentional. It didn't seem like an afterthought. And that's something when I post about all the green burial websites that I'm vetting on my website, on the internet, I'm really cautious about ones that advertise themselves as hybrid unless I can see it with my own eyes. If you're not putting that you're doing this on your website, if you're not openly marketing, if you're not showing photographs of these offerings, how am I to believe that you really have this, and you're not just grabbing onto a keyword for Google right now?
Right. I think that's fair. And I think you are highlighting what I was saying earlier about how can we get families to pay attention before they need any of these services, because you are
Mhm.
not going to have time to do this vetting process once the death has occurred. And I think people like you and I, this is partly what we're trying to do for the public, is to do some of that legwork so we can let people know that yes, we've seen this place. And honestly, that was the mistake that I made in just being told over the phone that, oh yes, we offer natural burial, and not seeing for myself that, oh, this really does not meet, not even close, it does not meet the criteria.
Yeah.
um, And, whether or not, so we've mentioned the Green Burial Council, there's the Green Burial Society in Canada. We also have a Natural Burial Association. And so there are different groups that I think are trying to do this work, but whether or not they are able to hold cemeteries to account, what I would say is that they are at least giving us language and standards that we might, the consumer, the public, families might try to use that to understand, well, what should I be expecting? And the fact that somebody's sort of converted the storage area on the property into something that they're just calling green burial is maybe not what we're imagining. Here in Ontario, we at the moment only have hybrid cemeteries, and there are places like Glenwood Cemetery in Picton is a hybrid, and it is absolutely beautiful. There's one in Niagara as well. Simcoe County has just been approved, has announced that they will be having a natural burial cemetery that is dedicated to natural burial. So that's coming. But right now, I think what we see happening, it is existing cemeteries that recognize there is demand, and they're trying to meet that demand. And a lot of them are doing it because it's good for business, and they're not necessarily doing it because they care about the values that drive many of us to want natural burial as an option.
Yep, very well said. Well, tell me, before we close out, tell me what you're doing with Community Deathcare Ottawa to educate the people before the time of need arises.
Sure. I will do that. And before I do, though, I'm going to add one more thing on the greenwashing, because I'm aware of multiple instances where the advocates for alkaline hydrolysis, sometimes known as aquamation or water cremation, and a process that I'm in favor of. I think it's a great alternative to flame cremation. But I am aware of several instances where, whether in sort of brochures or in presentations, a graph is being presented that shows alkaline hydrolysis as the greenest option out of anything, including greener than natural burial. And they are quoting a study, a report out of the Netherlands. And this is how bad the greenwashing is. I'm the nerd who actually went looking for the report, and it says no such thing. So this is just a fiction that's being shared in the industry, and it's the kind of thing that does get me kind of riled up, because you're lying to the public. It's a very fancy graph. It looks great, but it is based on nothing.
Can you name and shame who did it?
No, I'm not going to name and shame, because
will you let me know so I can find it later? Because I'll just privately message them.
I will happily do that.
Very good.
Community Deathcare. We are an education and advocacy group. We do a lot of connecting. People want so we don't directly provide services. Many of us are death doulas, but we, if you called us looking for a death doula, we would direct you to practitioners that we know of and trust in the community. We do events. We're actually planning we do an annual event. We have a couple of annual events, including in October. We're planning that right now. It's going to be, the theme this year is a Victorian death. And, so we do things like grief rituals and movies and conversation. We've had a labyrinth, all sorts of ways of bringing the public, inviting them into the conversation, trying to share information with them, sometimes doing that through, entertainment or, as best we're able, experiential events. We do home funeral demos pretty often, pretty regularly. We do shrouding demos pretty regularly and invite people to be shrouded themselves.
Nice.
So it's but the other thing that's really amazing about it, and anyone who's listening who's interested in this, as both a topic, but as something they want to be involved in, find your people. Find the people in your community who are interested in this, because it is the kind of work that we can often end up feeling isolated or like that we're in a silo. But there are others out there that are really passionate about this, and we have come together as a community, and it's been so beautiful. The thing I hear over and over again, we'll have a social and be sitting on the back deck, and people will say, my God, it's the first time they've come. It is such a relief. I can't believe I can just talk about this. And
Mm-hmm.
it's always amusing to me. I'm sure, Melissa, you would find the same, because it's like we talk about this all the time. We're not afraid of talking about dying or loss, or, when we had to put down a pet, or, all of these things. We recognize it as part of our lived experience and very much part of our sacred story. So we as we don't turn away from the harder conversations, and sometimes there's such a relief to find a space that is welcome. And I know that you're going to know what I'm saying here, Melissa. And Deathcare folks are a good time. When you are engaged in end of life, in endings, in recognizing that all of this comes to an end, that it's finite, there's an understanding of how precious these days are, and we make the best of them. So if you are looking to find a fun bunch of friends, I would say find your local community death care practitioners and, go for coffee.
Absolutely. And this leads me to segue into saying that I've been really isolated for the last few years. And what you mentioned, finding your death care tribe or your group to work with, I'm thankful to have those folks, but they're on the East Coast. So I was planning this in 2027, but it looks like this fall I'm gonna be moving to New England to be closer to my death care tribe,
Oh
so
my gosh, that's amazing.
imagine what I'm gonna get accomplished then.
I love it. I love it. Well, I'll plan a road trip.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is a really a strong community in the Northeast.
Mhm,
I kind of, I think it might be cultural in a sense that as we make our West Coast is always most progressive, East
mhm,
Coast the most traditional, and that it sort of is a spectrum, whether we're talking Canada or the U.S.
mhm,
And so I think on the East Coast, like the memory of caring for our dead is a little closer at hand.
mhm,
How did we tend to our dead, and laying them out, going to the church cemetery. It's maybe not so far removed from us.
mhm.
The flip side to that argument is, because the West Coast is progressive, I think they're very welcoming of new ways of doing things. So, um, it's not a contest or a race, but it is interesting to notice how it's emerging in these various places.
Yep, I'll
I'm
be,
I'm not I'm not
excited.
surprised that human composting is coming, as a West Coast initiative.
Yeah. Yep, Katrina Spade did some really amazing things to get that going, so
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
awesome.
that. I don't think that would have happened in the Maritimes or, in New
Mm-mm,
England.
mm-mm, nope, not at all.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Kelly. Real quick, where can you be found online?
To check out communitydeathcareottawa.com. It is a great resource, and you will find me there. I would also say, you can find me on Instagram with Kelly Butler. I do have a website, but I'm gravitating towards a new site. But yeah, so maybe stick to communitydeathcareottawa.com for now. That's the most reliable.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thank you, Melissa. This has been a real pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Exposing Death Care, the podcast. I truly appreciate your support and the courage of those who have contributed to or shared their stories with us. If you or someone you know has something to share, we encourage you to reach out. You can remain anonymous, and your story could prevent future harm. You can leave comments, ask questions, or provide feedback by connecting with us on social media at Exposing Death Care on TikTok and Instagram, The Modern Mortician on YouTube, and all streaming platforms. Like, follow, and share. Podcast music titled Exit Strategy by Enlia.